Rodrigo stood on an old pedestrian bridge, staring grimly into the dark water. Above his head, there was the roar of a noisy highway. The brand new road, connecting the historic part of the city to the ring road, had been built very recently. Now it loomed over the small ancient bridge like a giant over a terrified dwarf. Rodrigo himself felt just as small and insignificant. How long ago was the time of his rapid ascent and enormous financial success? How long had he considered himself one of the powerful of this world, having achieved everything one could desire? How naive he had been back then. He was a country boy who, after school, got involved with a gang of criminal robbers, making his first profit through criminal protection of small businesses. Yes, his mother was right when she tearfully pleaded with her only son to reconsider this unjust life. Rodrigo, my son, think about it before it's too late. I'm begging you. Such a life won't lead you to anything good. Stop it, Mom, he grimaced as if he was in pain. Then what, in your opinion, should I do? Become a driver and toil away for the rest of my life, like Dad? Well, why not? An honest life is always better, don't we live well enough? Have you and Teresa ever lacked anything? Yes, we don't have palaces or yachts, but we stood firmly on our own 2 feet as long as your father was alive. And everything we have, our home, your father earned through his hard work, without robbing anyone. And you? What about me? Rodrigo snapped. Didn't you think this life wasn't suitable for me? No, everyone has their own path, you know. I don't want to spend all my years in the village, I want to see the world. And we're not robbing anyone, just providing conflict resolution services, Rodrigo smirked. Oh, so that's what it's called now, his mother sighed bitterly. If your father were alive. Enough. He abruptly interrupted her. I'm tired of your lecturing. Dad did this, Dad did that. I'm not like him, do you get it? I'm going to live my own life. I understand, she looked at him with pity and even sympathy, as if he were still an ignorant child. This infuriated Rodrigo, and he stormed out of the house, slamming the door. He didn't return for several days, staying overnight with his new friends. And then he came back, packed his things, and left his father's house forever. At least, that's how it seemed to him at the time. While his father was alive, Rodrigo's parental home was truly a happy place. His father was strong and abstained from drinking, which was a rarity in rural areas. He spent his whole life in their native village, working as a driver and combined harvester operator. He was always skilled with machinery. He even built a car with his own hands from an old, wrecked body of a crashed vehicle, bought for a pittance and considered beyond repair by the mechanics. Over time, he obtained a used engine and various parts from different sources, either finding them or haggling for a good deal. He worked diligently for several years in his garage workshop until he had a practically new car with excellent performance. They used it to go mushroom picking, to the city, and to fairs in neighboring villages. They went everywhere with it. They lived well, by rural standards, thanks to the healthy lifestyle of Rodrigo's father, which he inherited from his own parents. Rodrigo still remembered his grandfather vividly, who was a tall old man with a long white beard, his head almost touched the ceiling. When they were children, before school, he and his sister genuinely believed that their grandfather was Santa Claus. The resemblance to the portrayal of the mythical figure on Christmas cards was striking. However, their grandfather was always strict, reserved, and always busy with work. Only on weekends and major religious holidays, when he didn't work and didn't allow anyone else to work, would he indulge in idleness and jokes. Both Rodrigo's father and his uncle, along with his 5 paternal aunts, grew up under the serious and hard-working influence of their upbringing. None of them became alcoholics, none of them left the village in search of a better life. This family, along with their own growing families, formed a close-knit extended family of the Santos, shouldering the responsibility for running the entire household. Both the men and women of this lineage worked on the land, and every young person in the surrounding area dreamed of marrying into their family. Only Rodrigo was the black sheep in this family. Oh Lord, please guide him. His mother prayed day and night for her only son, crying and regretting her husband joined the majority too early. And Rodrigo, remembering his father, was always angry. His sudden death was a shock to the family, and from that moment until the present day, Rodrigo, who was a high school student at the time, asked himself a single question: why, oh why did he intervene? Did he need it more than anyone else? He left them all orphaned, but he could have still been alive and well. However, it wasn't only him who was haunted by such a question. The circumstances of his father's death were truly tragic. One day during the hot harvest season, he had forgotten his glasses in the combined harvester while reading. In the evening, he settled down with a newspaper but realized that his glasses were missing. Most people would have shrugged it off, thinking they could retrieve them the next day. But his father, always quick on his feet, immediately went back to the combine harvester to get his glasses. On the way back, in the twilight, he saw suspicious individuals sneaking around the auto warehouse where gasoline, spare parts, and many other useful things were stored. Mikhailo followed them and became a witness to a robbery that had already taken place. The warehouse had been broken into, and two perpetrators were busy loading stolen goods into a car parked nearby. It turned out that those he had glimpsed in the darkness were accomplices lurking nearby. They noticed him as well and arrived at the scene of the crime, catching the unsuspecting witness. "Stand right where you are," Mikhailo shouted in a menacing tone. "What are you doing here?" protested the one who was not used to staying aside. "I told you, stay out of this," replied the other sharply. Mikhailo squinted his eyes to get a better look. In the twilight, their faces were indistinguishable. Besides, the men had pulled their caps and hats low over their faces, but he recognized the voice. "Basilio, is that you?" "Ah, damn it, he found out." The instigator of the theft got angry and raised his hunting rifle. "Let me tell you one last time, leave well enough alone, Mikhailo. And forget what you saw. Then, I'll share something with you, and you won't be left with nothing. It's not taking from strangers, it's for the common good. In other words, for us." The other men laughed cheerfully and coarsely at their leader's joke. "You won't get away with this, Basilio." "Lower your gun," commanded Mikhailo. However, the robbers weren't willing to part with their loot so easily. Basilio, a fellow villager, fired a shot, not aiming particularly carefully, just to scare off the overly enthusiastic advocate of justice. The bullet ricocheted off some metal object and hit one of the thieves in the leg. He yelped in pain, and taking advantage of the general confusion, Mikhailo closed in on Basilio and engaged in a struggle, trying to wrest the weapon from his hands. During the fight, Basilio, as he later claimed, accidentally pulled the trigger again. Mikhailo fell on the ground, the shot hitting him right in the heart. The investigation dragged on for many months. All the culprits were imprisoned, the stolen goods were returned, but no one could bring back Rodrigo's father. He, who had idolized his parents since childhood, suffered greatly from this loss. He became withdrawn, gloomy, and started smoking at that time. Well, in the end, he ended up associating with a bad crowd. He never spoke about his father to anyone since then and, in general, remained tight-lipped about his family. However, in the circles he now moved in, no one cared about his past. Everyone in the gang had their own stories to tell, everyone had their baggage and skeletons in the closet. Gradually, their criminal business evolved into a vast network, reaching the nearest town. And it continued to grow. Rodrigo noticed the birds of higher flight and received an offer that he couldn't refuse. That's how he ended up in a big city, far away from his ancestral home, now lost in one of the countless villages. For the first few years, things went remarkably well for Rodrigo himself and their shadowy business, which extended into every sphere of urban life. Not a single moderately significant enterprise escaped their common fate. They controlled them, exploited them, and in return, provided protection against even more reckless criminal gangs. Rodrigo was a smart and observant guy, and soon he began to realize that his leaders had the necessary connections both in law enforcement and in government. They had their people in the police, the mayor's office, and everywhere. Any issue could be resolved for the right amount of money. Everything depended on the size of the bribe. Like everyone else in his circle, after accumulating enough wealth, Rodrigo opened his first legitimate project. He chose a fast food cafe in the form of a snack bar. And he made the right choice. The fast food chain he acquired through a franchise quickly expanded, bringing in good profits. The next step was gas stations, not in the most popular locations, as those were already occupied by higher-ranking owners, but along the highway adjacent to the city. And this project proved successful. 8 years into this independent lifestyle, Rodrigo became a prominent businessman in the eyes of the public, having everything one could wish for: several expensive cars, an apartment in the city center, another one on the waterfront, another one for his mistress, a country house with a large plot in a prestigious location, staff to maintain and keep everything in order, and money, a lot of money. Money provided him with freedom, independence, confidence in tomorrow, and the opportunity to see the world. In short, he had almost everything. He hadn't started a family yet and wasn't in a rush to do it, as things were already great for him. Rodrigo hardly ever thought about his mother and sister, whom he left to fate many years ago. Rodrigo? Equals a young secretary would beam in a dazzling smile every time he entered his office, and the security guards would always give him a nod. With a distracted smile, if he was in a good mood, he would pass by, barely acknowledging the guard's presence, while affectionately patting Laura, the secretary, on the shoulder or playfully tapping her just below the back. She wouldn't mind if the attractive, wealthy boss allowed himself to do something else. But right now, Rodrigo was engrossed in his current affair, so Laura had nothing to catch on to. However, she didn't lose hope and was always ready to serve as the situation demanded. "Hey, buddy." One of his partners in the shadow business walked into the office without warning. Nowadays, they had grown out of the gangster category, and of course, they hadn't gone on raids to collect protection money from businessmen for a long time. They had their own enterprises, free from any influence from above. But they regularly delivered their shares to the higher-ups, who, in turn, kept their cut and passed the rest to the top. Rodrigo, like other figures of his level, didn't know where exactly this infamous big shot was or who it was, nor did he bother with such questions. It was none of his business. "Hey!" Rodrigo stood up to greet his brother, approached him, embraced him, and firmly shook the extended hand. "What's up?" "Everything's good." The guest lazily sprawled in a leather chair. "That girl in your reception looks cool. Do you make use of it?" "Well, not really," Rodrigo waved his hand indifferently. "She's just working here. I don't really have time for more." "You're wasting your fortune," the colleague laughed good-naturedly. "What if I steal her away?" "Go ahead, if you like her," Rodrigo generously allowed. "We'll find another one." "Well, all right, let her bring us some coffee then," the newcomer smirked, "and we'll see. I came to talk to you about the important deal. There's a big opportunity to make a lot of cash. We need to pool our finances." "How much?" Rodrigo asked briskly, nodding. It was a customary occurrence, and he had long grown accustomed to such visits. But upon hearing the amount, he whistled. "Well, that's a lot. I can't gather that much." "Sell something," the guest advised indifferently. "My dad says it's necessary. You got this?" "Yeah," Rodrigo frowned slightly. "It won't be quick though." "What's the project about?" "They're going to build roads in the city and the region. We need to win the tender, pay off the authorities, and then it will triple our investment." The colleague briefly outlined the situation. "I see," Rodrigo nodded. They had coffee with expensive whiskey, and then the guest went out to chat with Laura in the reception area, while Rodrigo pondered what he could sell quickly. Disobeying was out of the question. If it was necessary, then it was necessary. It was the nature of the business. He called his realtor friend, and together they concluded that the gas stations would sell the fastest. Reluctantly, Rodrigo signed the necessary documents and mentally bid farewell to a portion of his business. "It's all right," he comforted himself, "it will triple the investment later." Of course, this sacrifice had no immediate impact on his daily life, but his income plummeted drastically. After a couple of months, he even had to dip into the dollar reserve that Rodrigo had saved for a rainy day. "Well, how's it going with the tender?" he asked when meeting the same colleague who came to him before the gas station sale. "Ah, it's a complete disaster," the other replied in an indifferent tone. "Competitors bought out the tender, and we're out of luck. It happens." "So, our investments won't pay off?" Rodrigo clarified, trying to speak in the same manner his friend did. He had a chill down his spine. "Not this time, buddy," he nodded. "Not this time. C'est la vie." And he laughed, throwing his head back. "C'est la vie," Rodrigo murmured in a subdued voice and forced a pained smile. And that was it. There was nothing left to cover the expenses. There was no one to demand anything from either. The gas stations were gone. Goodbye, beloved ventures. Well, I'll have to tighten the belt, cut expenses, maybe sell something to buy at least one again, well, or something else. What else can I sell? Rodrigo's thoughts raced in disarray, and an unpleasant throbbing pounded in his temples. After considering all possible options, he finally settled on the least painful one from his perspective. "Hello, sunshine." He entered the apartment where his mistress lived and found her lying in a foamy bath. "Oh, darling." She faux delighted, putting on a welcoming face mask. "What brings you here at this time of day?" "I just came back from the gym. I got really tired." "You won't believe it. My new trainer is amazing." "I swear, my poor legs." "Angelina," he interrupted her, not bothering to listen to the empty chatter. "I'm here on business." "Oh, what is it?" She gracefully lifted her petite, soapy foot out of the cloud of bubbles. "Well, then, come here, the business will wait." And she giggled at her own pun. "No, you don't understand," Rodrigo twitched his mouth, his face contorting. "Actually, let's talk later," he suddenly decided and started taking off his clothes. "That's the right way," Angelina smiled broadly. Later, when they were lying side by side on a huge bed in front of a wide-open window leading to a spacious balcony, smoking, he casually said to her, "I had unexpected expenses, darling." "Oh, poor thing." She pouted, feigning a regretful expression. "How awful." "Yes," Rodrigo agreed, flicking his cigarette into the ashtray. "It's a real shame, and it means I'll have to sell this apartment." "What?" Angelina protested at this sudden turn in their pleasant conversation. "Sell my apartment? Where do you think I'll live?" "Well, you were living somewhere before," he shrugged indifferently and reached for the pack lying next to him, lighting another cigarette. Wait. Angelina jumped off the bed, genuinely alarmed. She hurriedly threw on a robe and paced back and forth in the room, repeatedly returning to his bedside. "Is this some kind of joke? Are you testing me?" "Well, you got it wrong, darling. I'm smarter than you think. Of course, I love you and all that, and you never had any intention of selling my apartment." She exclaimed the last words in despair, staring at him in bewilderment. "Right?" "No, babe, not like that," he gently shook his head. "Not like that. It's not a joke or a test. I urgently need money, so I have to sell it. Besides, let me remind you that this apartment, the car you drive, and everything else here was bought by me and is registered in my name. And you're not my wife to be making demands. When there's money, we'll buy another one, that's it." "What am I supposed to do then?" Tears welled up in the girl's eyes, and her lips trembled. "Where do I go?" "For now, you can stay at my country house," he said. "Or go back home for a while. Whatever you prefer." "Listen, do you even understand what are you talking about?" Angelina exclaimed in protest. "What do you mean by home? To my mother's den in a rundown tower block, to the woman that I barely saw even at her funeral, wearing white slippers? Or to the dorm where the girls and I used to live before I met you? And the country house? It's in the middle of nowhere." "Many people commute from the countryside," Rodrigo calmly stated. "Don't act foolishly. If it's necessary, then we should do it, and there's no need to shout like that. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Instead of yelling, you should be thankful that I'm not throwing you out on the street. I understand perfectly well how things stand. Oh, so you understand? Angelina grew furious. And what is it? That it's okay to deceive an honest girl, promise her the world, get her used to a good life, and then just ditch her like this? I suppose you won't be paying me to support me anymore? I will, Rodrigo promised. His face was contorting with disgust. He liked making this scene less and less, but he had nowhere to escape. He did feel a certain responsibility for Angelina. However, it must be acknowledged that she had crossed the line, and the anger that accompanied each of her furious words was suffocating him, preventing clear thinking. I will, but less, until I sort things out, he repeated. And this is just outrageous. Angelina squealed. Who do you think I am? A beggar? I didn't find myself in a dump when I agreed to be with you and indulge in lovey-dovey stuff. I made it clear what I was signing up for. You provide me with a comfortable life, and I give you love and affection. Isn't that right? And now you took advantage of my innocence, and when it got tiresome, you kicked me to the curb? Innocence? Rodrigo burst into laughter. Don't tell me nonsense. As if I have no idea how innocent you really were. Shame on you. And enough talking. It will be as I said. Your job is to shut up and listen, woman. And if something doesn't suit you, go home. Go home to your mommy. With that, he decided to end the pointless discussion. He gathered his things, leisurely dressed in the spacious, luxurious bathroom, and left, no longer listening to Angelina's screams. The next day, he called the realtor again, handed over the documents for the apartment, and issued a power of attorney. The money from the sale was supposed to be enough to buy some remote gas station. It wasn't anything remarkable, but it was a relief. He had to find a way to make up for the losses. Rodrigo, your mistress has given us a surprise here. Soon the realtor called him, a seasoned and hardened woman who had seen all sorts of things in her lifetime. What now? Rodrigo responded irritably, preoccupied with handling his manager at the time. Come and see for yourself, the woman said ominously and hung up. Good Lord. Equals was all he could say when he arrived at the location. The previously clean and neat, exquisitely decorated apartment now presented a pitiful sight. Everything that could be taken had been removed. There was no plumbing in the bathrooms, just black, horrifying holes in the place of the expensive Italian toilet, jacuzzi, and bidet. There were no light fixtures, sconces, or chandeliers. The furniture had been completely taken away, curtains and other textiles were removed, and even the blinds were not spared. There was no household appliances or fitted kitchen, absolutely nothing remained. And not to mention, there were no interior doors at all. We seemed to be living in a different time. The realtor raised her eyebrows with a nervous smirk. Back then, people indeed used to remove doors and take their own stoves. But she went above and beyond. What did you do to her, Rodrigo? Nothing, he muttered through gritted teeth, trying to keep himself composed. In short, the realtor briskly crossed her arms over her chest, selling this as luxury housing is no longer possible. No one will pay such a price for this wreckage. I understand, he barely managed to say. We'll sell it as an apartment in a rough finish, the woman summed up. My commission remains as agreed, we have a lot of work ahead. Do you agree? Okay, equals Rodrigo sighed and hurried to leave, cursing himself for everything he was worth. I should have dragged that bitch out of here by her hair, taken the keys in the car, and placed a guard here. And now? Frustration made him grit his teeth. Well, I'll get to you. He promised the elusive Angelina, clenching his fists in anger. How about that, huh? Meanwhile, the well-built guy in plain clothes was joyfully laughing, hugging, and squeezing the very same Angelina. Nora, how do you like it? Now we'll live it up. Don't call me that. The girl protested, pouting her lower lip, but she didn't resist her suitor's persistent caresses. "Oh, come on, stop pretending, putting on someone else's mask." The guy was clearly overjoyed about something. "We sold the car to dealers, and by the time he realizes it, it'll be too late to do anything. The clothes have been spread across garages as well. We'll have a nice sum in our hands. Then we can gradually sell them off." "Oh, my precious." With one hand, he groped Angelina Nora, while the other clenched another cold beer can. "And tomorrow, we'll already be at the Polish border. Our friends are waiting. You'll love it, darling. I'm still a trucker, and you'll be a homemaker." He laughed heartily again. "How do you like this? Maybe we'll even have kids," he added, affectionately kissing the girl. "And let that spoiled fool of yours search and squeal in the wind. They won't find my truck, that's for sure. They won't even think of it. And if anything happens, I've got buddies everywhere." The heavily intoxicated guy boasted. "That's how it is." Fate had clearly turned its dark side towards Rodrigo. Ever since he reluctantly sold his gas stations and lost a substantial portion of the selling price of his apartment, along with his expensive foreign car, misfortunes had been raining down on him one by one. His beloved and profitable cafe, located in a prime income-generating location, burned down. The arsonist was never found, and everything was attributed to faulty wiring. But Rodrigo felt that behind this incident, in some way, stood that despicable Angelina. Following this disaster, he was involved in a car accident, completely wrecking his beloved car and suffering significant injuries, even though he wasn't at fault in the collision. The truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel and veered into oncoming traffic, collecting a group of 5 cars. However, one of the other victims had even less luck than Rodrigo. It resulted in a fatal outcome. Our hero ended up in the hospital with multiple fractures and bruises. Thankfully, his head wasn't seriously injured and his spine was intact. However, the broken ribs, internal organ contusion, and 2 broken legs still required a lengthy rehabilitation. After finally being discharged several months later, Rodrigo discovered that his manager had successfully vanished in an unknown direction, taking most of the assets with him. Chaos reigned in the business affairs, with almost no profits and employees leaving in droves. The once lucrative business was now in a dismal state. To make matters worse, creditors started coming out of the woodwork, demanding payment for debts Rodrigo had no knowledge of, which were accumulated by the manager who fled. Soon, it became clear that he would have to part ways with this business as well. Business partners turned their backs, and his thug friends not only failed to help but also demanded compensation for the months of forced inactivity. "Brothers, I'm broke. Just give me some time, at least a little." Rodrigo tried to convince himself of some relief. But no one cared about his difficulties. If they said to pay, he had to pay. If he couldn't, they would add it to his debt. That was all there was to it. He had to sell everything, literally. When he settled his debts, mandatory contributions to the prison fund, he was left with a paltry sum, a wrecked car after the accident, and only one last apartment to live in. After all, he needed somewhere to live. "Don't whine, kid," advised one of the older comrades indifferently. "You're neither the first nor the last. Let's start collecting money from the dimwits. We always need people in these positions, you know?" Yes, he knew it, but he never even thought that he would have to start all over again. How? Such a thought didn't even fit in Rodrigo's mind. He pitted himself madly and was honestly ready to jump off a bridge. He wanted to go and punch someone, find Angelina, and thoroughly disfigure her Botox face. But all of that was impossible. Who would hire a destitute person now? I've had enough of all this. In powerless rage, he clenched his fists until they hurt and kicked with all his might at a stone lying at the beginning of the footbridge. But it turned out to be bigger than it looked, deeply embedded in the ground, with only the top visible. He nearly sprained his foot, that was all. The pain momentarily distracted Rodrigo from his troubles and self-flagellation. Swearing to himself, he walked down the street, wherever his eyes took him. He walked as if in a trance until he stumbled upon a small, filthy creature huddled in a corner near the transformer box in a dusty park. Rodrigo squinted and realized it was a child. Incredibly dirty and dressed in rags, it was impossible to tell if it was a boy or a girl. It was still quite cold in April nights. Rodrigo overcame his disgust and cautiously touched the child's shoulder. A dreadful thought flashed through his mind. Could the child be dead? But the child stirred and, turning its head, looked at Rodrigo with frightened, sleepy, and enormous eyes. "Why are you here?" Rodrigo asked as gently as possible. "It's cold." "Where are your parents?" The child didn't answer, only huddled up and pulled its head into its shoulders as if anticipating a blow. No, it's not good, Rodrigo suddenly decided. He forgot about his own difficulties, and something inside him flipped, as if a candle had been lit. He felt both sorry and ashamed. And something else. He wasn't ready to analyze his feelings. He simply scooped up the foundling, held it close, and was about to run home when a weak voice spoke up. "Fluffy, my Fluffy." In response, someone groaned pitifully, and a scrawny, bedraggled kitten emerged from the nearest bush, skin and bones. It also cautiously stared at Rodrigo with teary yellow eyes. "Damn, there are two of you here." Rodrigo pondered. Carrying both the cat and the child on foot seemed unlikely. Besides, the cat didn't seem particularly cooperative. What to do? "You know, buddy, we'll call a taxi where you can go with animals," Rodrigo suddenly rejoiced, pleased with his own resourcefulness. They had used such a service once with Angelina. She had an urge to get a puppy, so they went to pick up a puppy but, due to inexperience, didn't bring a carrier. The breeder suggested calling a taxi for animals. Okay, Rodrigo tapped on his phone, searching for the right number. Ah, there it is, geolocation, got it. "The car will arrive in 7 minutes, he informed the cat, inexplicably winking. The kitten, strangely enough, didn't run away but sat at a respectful distance, attentively watching what this seemingly out-of-nowhere person was doing with his little friend. "How did you end up like this?" Rodrigo muttered, pacing back and forth while gently holding the small body close to him. The child fell asleep again, its thin neck drooping helplessly. It was evident that the child was extremely exhausted and running out of strength. Finally, the car arrived. The driver, upon learning whom he was supposed to transport, nearly rolled his eyes. "Man, how do you plan to lure him into the carrier? Look, it's a stray critter, sick on top of that. He'll give me some kind of disease for sure. No, I don't want this stuff here." The taxi driver was about to leave, but Rodrigo stopped him and firmly handed him a banknote. "Man, I really need this. You can clean the carrier afterward." "Well, if you say so," the taxi driver agreed immediately. "But you'll have to catch him yourself later." Rodrigo carefully placed the child, wrapped in his own jacket, on the seat, took the carrier, and placed it near a bush. Then he started calling the cat. "Kitty, kitty, come here, don't be afraid, I won't hurt you." The cat stubbornly remained in the thorny bushes, nervously flicking its tail from side to side and showing no intention of coming out. Every time Rodrigo approached to grab it, the cat burrowed deeper into its hiding place, emitting threatening growls and hisses from the thicket. "Well, to hell with you then." Rodrigo got angry after a few minutes. "Do as you please, keep hanging around here." At that moment, a plaintive child's voice came from the open car. "Fluffy, Fluffy." And a quiet, exceedingly hopeless cry. The cat became alert, pricked up its ears, stopped hissing, and smoothly slipped out of the bush. It assessed the situation and, in 2 seconds, bypassing all obstacles in the form of the intimidating stranger and the carrier, leaped into the car, settling on the rear seat next to the boy and hissed fiercely at the turned-around driver. "Wow, what a tiger!" The driver shook his head. "How do I ride with him?" "Just drive slowly," Rodrigo ordered, still maintaining his authoritative tone. He climbed into the front seat, carefully fastening the seatbelt around the sleeping child. "He won't do anything to you, see? He's protecting his friend. We'll get there without any adventures, and you'll receive the same banknote again." The elated driver decisively shook his head and set off. He had dealt with stranger passengers before, it wasn't his first time. However, his natural curiosity soon got the better of him, and before dropping off his peculiar passengers, he asked Rodrigo, "Is he yours?" He nodded towards the child. "Yes, he is." Rodrigo nodded affirmatively and didn't say another word, but slipped a couple of crumpled banknotes to the taxi driver. "Take care, boss." The driver waved after him. "Call if you need anything." Rodrigo gently pulled out the foundling, and the cat slipped out after them. The trio disappeared into the entrance of a solid multi-story building. "Ah, what a life!" The driver shook his head, neatly folded his earnings, and departed on his own. Finding himself in the familiar warmth of his comfortable apartment, Rodrigo suddenly, almost vividly, imagined what the little foundling had gone through. Carefully undressing the child in the bathroom, the man almost screamed in shock. Before him was a living skeleton, all skin and bones. A scene from some old movie about prisoners immediately flashed before his eyes. "How is this possible?" Rodrigo muttered aloud. The child, who turned out to be a girl, sat silently, not uttering a word, and only gazed absent-mindedly somewhere with almost vacant eyes. Rodrigo did his best, washing the tiny one with warm water and shampoo, wrapping her in a towel, and bringing her into the room. He rummaged in the closet, found his smallest t-shirt, and somehow managed to fit it onto the emaciated body. Placing the little girl on the couch, he pushed a chair next to her to prevent any accidental falls, covered her with a warm blanket, and went to the kitchen. He heated milk in the microwave, made a sandwich with sausage, and brought it all to his unexpected guest. "Here, have this, eek," he said. A feral gleam appeared in the girl's eyes, and she pounced on the food, growling almost like the cat from the bushes. Rodrigo, witnessing this sight, broke out in a cold sweat. "Fluffy," the little girl called, leaving a small piece of the sandwich, and looked around. The cat, still sitting in the hallway under the clothes hanger, immediately appeared next to her and swiftly swallowed its share. "Well, you're both something," Rodrigo barely squeezed out, and went to make another portion of food. The cat opened a can of Sprats in the kitchen. There was nothing else suitable, so Rodrigo poured milk into a saucer. "Come here, little kitten," he called out to the animal. He didn't have to repeat it twice. Less than a minute later, both the can of canned fish and the saucer were gleaming clean. The little girl quickly swallowed her food again, but still didn't say anything. She only sighed contentedly and leaned back on the pillow, covering her eyes. The cat crawled under the couch with her and fell silent. Rodrigo started to think that a doctor was needed, that much was clear. But if he took her to a clinic, they would ask numerous questions to which he had no answers. And, of course, they would take the little girl to an orphanage. Then he, Rodrigo, would hardly be able to help her in any way. Who was he? An unemployed thug? A bankrupt businessman? Yes, he had never even had a job in his life. No child welfare agency would entrust a child to such a person. Strangely enough, though, he never even questioned why he actually needed this child. He simply felt a constricting sense of insane pity and an overwhelming desire to protect this helpless little creature from the entire world. Pondering in this manner, Rodrigo decided to call the doctor who had treated him at the private clinic during his months of recovery. The doctor answered right away, unsurprised by the call, and said he would come for a visit, of course. He mentioned the fee. Rodrigo still had some money, not much, of course, but compared to the taxi driver, he could probably be considered well off. Smirking mentally at this pun, the young man decided to tidy up a bit while waiting for the doctor. It had been a while since he had done such things, but strangely enough, now that he had someone to strive for, the work practically flew through his hands. He closed the door to the guest bedroom to avoid disturbing his unexpected guests and focused on cleaning. Then he went to the nearest store, bought the first jars of baby food he came across, milk, a loaf of bread, cat food, some good cooked sausage, and various other supplies. In the evening, the doctor arrived. Upon seeing the patient, he let out a slight whistle. Where did she come from? he asked. Rodrigo told him the story. She needs to be in hospital, the doctor pronounced without appeal. She has extreme exhaustion, lice, who knows what else. The child needs to be examined, and her parents or guardians need to be found. I am her guardian, Rodrigo insisted, and I have no intention of giving her to anyone. Perhaps her parents are looking for her, the doctor tried to reason with his recent patient. Is this how it's done? You find a stray on the street and decide to keep her like a cat? She's a human being. She needs documents and proper care. Listen, doctor, Rodrigo pleaded. Can't you see the condition she's in? What kind of care does she have now? Don't you know how things work? Let her stay with me until she recovers. Maybe she'll be able to tell us something later. The girl looks about 4 years old, the doctor squinted. She won't be able to tell us anything, she's in a state of shock right now. Even if she remembered something, she would have long forgotten it. I have an idea, he sighed. Let's take her to our clinic, examine her. If something serious is found, we'll have to start the paperwork, call in specialists from child welfare. But if outpatient care is possible, you can hire a caregiver for her and take care of her at home. However, I must warn you immediately, it will be entirely your responsibility. Of course. Of course. Rodrigo assured him. Here, take it, thank you very much. Fortunately, nothing more serious than exhaustion and she had the development delays. For the second month, she stayed at Rodrigo's home, with 2 nannies constantly by her side. It was as if wings had sprouted on him. He wanted the girl to recover so badly that he was ready to do anything, even unload freight cars. He never returned to his criminal activities. And since he had no debts and no business anymore, no one was looking for him. Rodrigo began searching for a good and affordable auto repair shop. Eventually, he found one, got his car repaired there, and became a taxi driver. In between shifts, he indeed unloaded freight cars at the railroad. It was exhausting, but he had something to provide Christina with medical treatment and care. And he did it without dipping into his meager reserves, by previous standards. He named the girl Christina. Significant changes occurred in her condition. She gained weight, no longer resembled a living skeleton, began to speak little by little, and even smile. The cat, ever present by her side, also gained weight, grew new fur, stopped hiding under cabinets and beds, and continued to guard his little companion like a good shepherd. Rodrigo. The little girl smiled upon seeing her protector. Hello, Christina. When he returned home, he brought her sweet rolls with raisins, chocolate ice cream, colored pencils, and modeling clay. How was your walk today? He asked. It was good, the girl nodded. We went for a walk with the nanny. We walked for a whole hour in the morning until it started raining, the nanny reported. But we didn't go out in the evening, it was too damp there. The doctor told us to be careful, so she wouldn't catch a cold. That's right. Rodrigo approved. And now we're going to have coffee with pastries, right, Christina? Yes. The girl rejoiced and, holding onto Rodrigo's hand, walked with him to the large and bright kitchen to sit at the table. While the kettle was boiling, she sat on his lap, purring like a little kitten, tugging at his clothes and hair. Time passed. The doctor increasingly insisted on knowing what Rodrigo intended to do with his ward. Rodrigo made excuses, promising that he would think about it in another week. And so it went on. In reality, cold sweat would break out on him every time he imagined what would happen if Christina were taken away from him. How would he live then? For what purpose? The entire meaning of his existence now resided in this little girl, and his whole world, previously unknown, revolved around her. Eventually, Rodrigo made up his mind. It was clear that they couldn't stay in the city any longer. Soon, the doctor or maybe even kind neighbors would reveal their whereabouts, and heartless officials would take Christina away from him. That meant they had to leave. Somewhere no one would find them and ask unnecessary questions. But where exactly? Where could they find such a place? Rodrigo thought long and hard, considering various options. Oh, if all this had happened earlier, when he was rich, they would have gone anywhere in the world, whether it be the Maldives or the Himalayas, and lived happily. However, thinking in this manner, Rodrigo somehow overlooked the fact that when he was still wealthy, indifferent, and calculating, he would never have wandered around the city on foot, observing dusty roadside parks. Only one option remained: to take Cristina home to his mother. Rodrigo had no doubt that she would accept the girl as her own. It didn't matter that they hadn't seen each other for almost 10 years. It didn't matter that he was a wayward sheep and a complete scoundrel. His mother was the kindest person in the world, and she would certainly show compassion to the orphan. In the distant village far from the bustling metropolis, no one would be surprised that he brought a child home. He could say that her mother had died and the documents were lost in a fire. Yes, Cristina would enjoy herself in nature, in the fresh air. Rodrigo increasingly recalled his own childhood. After years spent away from his native home in feudal busyness, it seemed fantastically beautiful. How happy they were as children! They would sit by the hot stove on long winter evenings when the adults, having finished countless daily tasks, would relax there, indulging in simple domestic joys, his mother knitting, his father reading newspapers or books, and his aging grandfather peacefully dozing, covered with a caring blanket in a big rocking chair his father had made with his own hands. They would all shape dumplings together as a large family, freezing no less than 500 at a time. Uncle Sergio would come, and his father's sisters would bring their husbands and fiancé, along with their own little ones. Noise, laughter, joyful merriment. And afterwards, they would all sit around a long, simple table made of smoothly planed boards, indulging in fresh pastries. Ah, the memories make the mouth water. How they would run to the bathhouse barefoot through the yard. How they would decorate a large Christmas tree for the new year. And summer, oh my! There was no better time than the hot, berry-scented, freshly mown grass summer in the countryside. The river, the sloping hill, freedom. The sandy quarry where they slid down the slopes like on an icy slide, raising clouds of sand. They would search for eggs from agile lizards, swim in the large pond, and go fishing at dawn. Oh Lord, once you start remembering, you can't stop. It's decided, they are leaving for home, to the village, with Cristina. And only one unpleasant thought tormented his soul. It kept him awake, not allowing rest. Is his mother still alive? Rodrigo decided not to take many things with him, demonstratively leaving them behind. He didn't dismiss the nannies and caregivers in advance so that the doctor, who was becoming sullener with each passing day, wouldn't suspect his intentions prematurely. Gradually, in small portions, he took what would be needed for the long journey with the little one: a pack of diapers, wet wipes, a supply of water and sterilized food, a couple of toys to keep Cristina entertained on the road, and some clothes. He bought some new items and took some old ones. He even bought a used carrier for the cat. He waited for the predetermined day, sent the nanny to the store, asked her to buy something urgent for Cristina, and placed the cat in the carrier, who had long since become accustomed to the new owner. He quickly dressed the little girl, and that was it. He left a power of attorney for the apartment with the same realtor in advance. She had never let him down, knew her job, and did it well. He arranged where to send the money to, on which card. He didn't tell her either that he was leaving for good. He said he needed to go away for a while on some business. Well, Cristina, Rodrigo adjusted the girl's jacket. Now we're going to the village to Grandma, our real home. Fluffy. The little girl demanded stubbornly. Where's Fluffy? With us, he's with us, don't worry. Look, it's sitting in the carrier behind us. See? He took out the plastic cage and showed it to the girl. See? That's our Fluffy. It's coming with us to the village. Hooray! Cristina beamed with a satisfied smile. Let's go. She had grown fond of car rides. Rodrigo often took her to the distant park or the waterfront for a stroll. And now the little girl assumed they were going on one of those outings. You can take a nap for now, we'll be driving for a long time. The young man gently fastened the child with the seatbelt in her car seat. It'll be a long journey, but it'll be fast, understand? Yes, Christina nodded and smiled brightly. Let's go, Daddy. Let's do it, my darling. He looked at the toddler with tears welling up in his eyes. She had started calling him Daddy only recently, prompted by the nannies. When Rodrigo heard that address for the first time, he almost burst into tears. Oh God! Yes, he would do anything for this little one. To avoid tiring Christina too much, he stopped halfway to spend the night at a roadside motel. Although he could have driven straight through. The journey to their destination would take about 13 hours, no more. But there was no rush, and they had a peaceful dinner, took a stroll around a sparse grove, and read a bedtime story about a princess. And Christina fell asleep calmly, lullabied by her caring daddy. And the daddy wasn't a fool. He covered the license plates with a special film, fearing pursuit. Now they wouldn't be able to track them down even with surveillance cameras if they tried. Early in the morning, they continued their journey and after a few hours reached the border of Rodrigo's native region. This was where the most familiar land began, his homeland. It seemed like every tree, every roadside post, and even the stray dogs lazily lying at gas stations appeared especially dear to him along the way. What's happening to me? Is old age creeping up on me? He thought with surprise, and immediately laughed it off. What old age? To hell with it. I'm still in my 30s, I won't turn 40 until next year. They were getting closer and closer to Rodrigo's hometown with Christina. Several neighboring villages were already behind them. And there it was, the ancestral home. How good it felt here, how peaceful. No noise of the big city, no eternal hustle and bustle. Wide open spaces, vast fields stretching into the distance. Rodrigo opened the windows, and the fresh, clear, piercing autumn air of the countryside filled the cabin. He greedily breathed in the pungent aroma of withered grass, decaying leaves, mushrooms lurking at the edges, and manure. Unnoticed, a road sign with the name of his village appeared. Christina. He gently shook the peacefully sleeping girl. We have arrived. We're getting out soon, wake up, little girl. Little girl, mumbled Christina, waking up and rubbing her eyes with her tiny fists. Christina, little girl. Yes, yes. Little girl, her happy daddy smiled. In the last month, Christina had been speaking better and more. And now, she even corrected her father. You're my little girl. He parked near his father's house, unbuckled the seatbelt, lifted the girl in his arms, and stepped toward the familiar, almost painfully familiar, gate. His heart tightened, tears welled up in his eyes. Taking a deep breath, Rodrigo pushed the door, but it wouldn't budge. He put it back, lifted his foot, already stepping forward, and stood there for a few seconds, staring blankly at the gate. What's going on? As long as Rodrigo could remember, doors in the village were never locked. Especially not the gates. He absent-mindedly scanned the area, found the doorbell button carefully covered on top with a piece of rolled-up rubber to protect it from rain, apparently. That was also something new. Could it be that his mother installed a doorbell? It was hard to believe, but the facts spoke for themselves. Shaking his shoulders, Rodrigo pressed the round white button. Nothing happened for 2 or 3 minutes. Then he pressed it again. A couple more minutes passed. Dad. Christina's voice whimpered. Christina is freezing. Can we come into the house? Soon, we'll go soon, Rodrigo promised her, but not with much confidence. Now he was considering his options, climbing over the low fence of the flower bed or going around the house and knocking on the back windows from the gardens. There were never any fences at the backyards for centuries. Everyone's gardens extended to the river, and potatoes grew freely, and Colorado beetles were a common problem. What's happening here? Rodrigo grumbled dissatisfied and was about to go to the backyards, but then the entrance door in the garden slammed shut, and someone's figure moved along the small path next to the apple trees. It's not my mother, for sure. Some guy. Who are you looking for? Rodrigo asked, approaching cautiously and examining him. Me? The guy became flustered. Someone from the Santos family. He added with horror, realizing that not all of his relatives might still be alive. Well, someone had to survive, at least. Ah, the man responded. Distant relatives again? Something like that, Rodrigo agreed. Hold on, the man grumbled but didn't open the gate. Instead, he turned around and headed back to the house. Agata! He shouted so loudly, opening the barn door, that Rodrigo flinched upon hearing his mother's name. Instantly, his heart eased. His mother was alive. Through the thickly growing apple tree branches, movement was visible on the pathway again. A woman in a simple house dress and worn-out slippers, shivering in an old synthetic coat, approached, absent-mindedly rummaging through her pockets. You must be from Rodriguez, huh? Without looking at the visitor, she muttered. It was here somewhere. Mom, Rodrigo said softly. Mommy. The woman froze in place, stretched her neck, scanning with somewhat blurred eyes and sniffing, like an old hunting dog. What is this? Is it my imagination? Mom. Rodrigo stepped forward and, leaning over the low gate, reached out his hand to his mother. Mom, it's me, Rodrigo. Rodrigo. The woman moaned sadly and weakly, staggering. The young man firmly grasped her forearm, his other hand pressing the quiet Christina against himself. Hold on, Mom, don't fall, everything's fine. Rodrigo. Rodrigo. The mother repeated, gripping the fence railing with her hand. Rodrigo, my son. Open up, Mom, the young man pleaded. It's locked here. Locked, the woman echoed, and then she snapped out of it. Oh, what am I doing, dear God? She slid the bolt, took an awkward step, leaned her whole body towards her son, and recoiled, sensing rather than seeing the child in his arms. Rodrigo, who is this with you? It's your granddaughter. The son happily announced, smiling. Christina. Oh, dear God. The mother covered her mouth with her hand, raised her eyebrows, and took a loud breath. Thank God. I've been waiting for so long. Well. Don't cry, Mom. What's the matter? Rodrigo got scared by his mother's intense reaction. Why do you cry? We should be happy now, let's go inside, Mom. Christina is freezing. Yes, the mother hurriedly replied. Let's go, my son. Alejandro. She joyfully called from the doorway as soon as they entered from the barn. Alejandro, what a joy! My Rodrigo has arrived with my granddaughter, Christina. Rodrigo? The man emerged from the room, scrutinizing the newcomer with confusion. Is it really you? Alejandro? The young man, in turn, was amazed to recognize in the unfamiliar man his former handicraft teacher. Back in the day, he would fiercely discipline them, the mischievous troublemakers, handing out punches and reprimands left and right, angrily demanding that the boys get their act together, stop smoking around the corner, and focus on their work. Rodrigo gently placed Christina on the floor, and his mother immediately busied herself with taking care of her, smiling and uttering various funny words. Who do we have here who's so nice? So little and wonderful? Whose adorable little girl is this? Daddy's, Christina scowled, casting suspicious glances at the unfamiliar woman from beneath her brows, ready to burst into tears. Fluffy. She finally called, remembering her faithful companion and protector as always. Daddy, bring Fluffy. Oh, yes, Fluffy. Rodrigo squatted down in front of the little girl. I'll go to the car now and come back with Fluffy. Don't worry, okay? I'll be quick. Okay, Christina promised with tears in her eyes. Hurry up, please, she pleaded sadly. But Rodrigo had already gone out to the car for the carrier. What does this mean, huh? Alejandro grumbled discontentedly, barely closing the door behind their guest. He didn't show up to his own mother for years, and now this. He surely wants to burden us with a child, doesn't he? Stop it, Alejandro. The woman pleaded. He's my son. Can't he visit his own home? At that moment, Rodrigo returned, and the conversation came to an end. The usual joyful inquiries began: where, how, who, what. The kettle whistled cheerfully on the gas stove, and various dishes appeared on the table. The cat, released from its cramped cage, immediately hid under the couch, not trusting anyone, true to its long-standing habit. Look at this kitty. Such a unique color and a face as white as itself, Alejandro remarked. Seems like it's a pedigreed one, huh? Looks like a British Shorthair, Rodrigo agreed. But it's not certain. I found him in the park together. He stumbled, nearly saying together with Christina. We were walking together with Christina there, he quickly corrected himself. She got so attached to him, it's simply amazing. And he follows her around like a watchful dog, they're never apart. You're so lovely. Rodrigo's mother couldn't stop marveling at her granddaughter. How old are you? 4. The girl got used to it and felt trust towards the kind elderly woman. 4 years old, she repeated, holding up 4 fingers. Oh, what a clever girl. The new grandmother was touched. Well, come on, eat some pastries before they get cold. I don't want to. The girl pouted. I want Nesquik. Ness, what? The grandmother didn't understand. That's what she calls the chocolate balls, Nesquik, Rodrigo explained. We have some with us, I'll get it now. Oh my goodness, what children eat in cities. Alejandro sighed disapprovingly and took another sip of homemade liquor. Rodrigo declined the drink, which didn't sit well with his new relative either. Look at you, becoming all city-like. Came in a fancy car, now turning up your nose at us. While they sat at the table, Rodrigo's mother talked to the esteemed guest about their relatives. Teresa has been married for 8 years and has 2 lively boys. Yes, we should invite them too, let them see. It's been so many years since they last saw each other. We'll definitely invite them tomorrow, Rodrigo said, yawning. Of course, of course. His mother bustled around. You need to rest after the journey. Look, even Christina is already nodding off. She warmly looked at the girl, who trustingly snuggled up to her big and grown-up son. This simple scene filled her kind heart with such unheard of joy that it was almost hard to breathe. It felt like if she took a slightly deeper breath, this unexpected happiness would shatter, turning into a fleeting vision, a rainbow dream. But no, the returning son and granddaughter were not a dream. They sat right here, in their own kitchen, very real. And Rodrigo had changed so much since their last meeting, which happened before their separation. Who would have known that he would return home only after 10 years or so? Thinking this, Agata fluffed the pillows and spread the sheets, preparing beds for her son and granddaughter. Tell me, my dear, how have you been all these years? She finally asked softly, staying alone with him in the cozy warmth of the small bedroom. And where is Christina's mother? Didn't she come with you? Christina's mother passed away, Rodrigo sighed deliberately sadly, following the planned script. Not long ago, but she hardly remembers her, she has a psychological trauma. Oh, dear Lord. His mother crossed herself, lowered her gaze, and murmured a fragment of a quick prayer. Oh, my. And she looked in her son's eyes with inquisitiveness, searching for grief and pain there. We weren't even married, he hurried to reassure his mother about himself. But I love Christina, she's my own flesh and blood, he added almost angrily, raising his voice as if someone was standing behind the door, trying to take his child away. Rodrigo. The elderly woman looked at her son with admiration. You've grown up so much, so independent. Mom, Rodrigo said, averting his eyes. I need to apologize to you. Forgive me, I behaved like as a skunk. Ever since Dad's death, I only thought about myself. It's okay, my son, his mother said softly and, approaching him, kissed his forehead. It's okay. You also had a psychological trauma. Embracing each other, they sat in silence and the dim light of the small room, softly illuminated by a small desk lamp next to the bed. On the other side, peacefully sprawled and lightly snoring in her sleep, Christina had long been asleep. "She looks so much like you." His mother smiled, approaching the couch and pulling up a chair, draping it with a woolen blanket. "She might tip over in her sleep any minute now." "Tomorrow, we'll go to the cemetery to visit Dad," Rodrigo said, almost fully immersed in sleep. "Good night." "Good night, my dear." His mother left, quietly closing the door. There was an almost palpable silence and an incredible tranquility unimaginable in the city. Only the branches of old cherry trees, grown near the walls of the long house, trembled faintly against the autumn wind, and somewhere in the alleyway, an restless dog barked. Rodrigo stretched, putting his last bit of effort into that movement before falling into a deep sleep, flicked off the dim lamp, and the world immediately plunged into absolute darkness. And the morning greeted them with such bright and warm sunlight as if it were still summer outside. His mother, who had already managed to bake a whole mountain of pastries from early morning, was also radiant like the sun. "Wake up, my darlings." "Good morning." She hugged her son and lifted her granddaughter in her arms. "Let's go have breakfast. We've been waiting for only you. We've been waiting for you while you were snoozing. Must be accustomed to sleeping until noon in the city." Alejandro grumbled quietly, getting up from the chair next to the stove. "Oh, come on, Alejandro, no need to complain." His mother waved her hand. "They must be tired from the journey yesterday." Rodrigo, filled with joy from everything that was familiar and forgotten, paid little attention to the old man's grumbling. So what if they got along with his mother? It didn't bother him much. It's just a matter of life, and she shouldn't spend it all alone. Besides, what right did he have to judge and meddle in other people's business? And the house and the household require a strong masculine hand, that's quite obvious. Look, they even installed a decent bathroom in the house, it wasn't there before. And they've got hot water from the boiler. And overall, wherever you look, you can sense the firm grip of a housekeeper. "I brought you gifts." Rodrigo suddenly remembered and went back to the car. He brought a large box. "Here. This is a robot vacuum cleaner, Mom. It will crawl around and clean for you." "Oh, my goodness!" his mother exclaimed, throwing up her hands. "There are so many things they can come up with." "And this is for you, Alejandro." Rodrigo handed the man a beautiful vertical box. "A 10-year-old Georgian liqueur. And here's another one," he added, handing him an envelope with a gift card to a well-known supermarket chain, one of which was also in the local district center. "Oh, why did you, Rodrigo?" Alejandro beamed with a smile, pleased with the gift. "You shouldn't have, really. It was definitely worth it." "Well, shall we go to the cemetery?" his mother suggested. At his father's grave, Rodrigo knelt down. "Dad," and he stood there for a long time, gazing at the iron monument. Finally, he stood up, brushed the dirt off his jeans, and turned to his mother. "We'll put a new granite one in the spring." "My son," his mother could only utter, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Are you staying with us for a long time, huh?" Alejandro asked with a friendly vibe during lunch. His good mood was partly influenced by the amount he saw on the gift card. For the rural backwater, it was a good sum of money. He could buy, for example, a lawnmower or water pump. Set up automatic irrigation so that he wouldn't have to walk around with a hose, spreading dirt. Yes, there were many things he could buy for the necessary household items. He just had to think it through, take a good look, so as not to make a wrong choice. "We'll see," Rodrigo evasively replied, not wanting to reveal his intentions just yet. First, he needed to explore and get a sense of things before understanding how everything fit together. He had already seen his sister after the cemetery, and he had introduced Christina to his mother. Her husband, too, a decent guy from the neighboring village. They have 2 children there, everything seemed fine. Now it was a matter of finding a place to live for Christina and himself here. They definitely wouldn't stay with his mother permanently. She had the house under control even without them. Yes, at first, Rodrigo planned to leave Christina here and return to the city to continue his previous profession. But the more he became attached to the girl, still in the city, the more it became evident to him that he wouldn't go back to his old way of life. And here, with his small savings from selling the apartment, he could surely buy something decent and still have some savings for a rainy day. Well, then something would come up. Anxiety of how he and his daughter would live in the village and what they would do suddenly vanished from Rodrigo's thoughts. After all, wouldn't a healthy, young man find something to do to provide for himself and the child? Do you remember Natin Romero? His mother suddenly asked, moving the plates from the table and pouring coffee. I remember, how could I forget? Rodrigo frowned. Natin was his classmate. He was the son of the very same Basilio who killed his father in a fight. They classified that killing as accidental, and the perpetrator received only 8 years in total for his crimes. That's how they valued a human life. The life of his own father, a wonderful, rare individual who could have lived many more great years and seen his grandchildren. And his father? Rodrigo asked his mother. Has he got out of prison already? No, she shook her head. He died in prison, I think from tuberculosis. Rodrigo suddenly felt a sharp joy and relief, as if fate itself had taken the sword of retribution into its hands. So, his mother continued, now he's the chairman here. Who? Natin? Rodrigo was astonished, distracted from his thoughts. Well, yes, she nodded, confirming her words. He's now called the chairman of the board. I see, Rodrigo contemplated, drank his coffee, and looked out the window. Let's go for a walk. He decided and, gathering Christina, went out with her through the gate. The former farm administration building, now the boardroom, was within easy reach. Taking a leisurely stroll, pausing at every corner to collect beautiful leaves, they reached the place in about 15 minutes. The schedule on the doorplate indicated that lunch would be over in about half an hour. Rodrigo pushed the door, and it creaked open. I'm looking for Natin Romero, he said to the rosy-cheeked girl behind the reception desk. He's at lunch, she informed him, carefully observing the stranger. And, in general, he probably won't be back today. Is there no work for him? Natin Romero has to work outside of his office today, the secretary frowned. I see. Rodrigo said goodbye and left the premises, back into the fresh air. Christina, pleased with the turn of events, energetically pulled him along to collect leaves again. He took her home and entrusted her to her grandmother's care, then walked the familiar path to the Romero's house. As Rodrigo had suspected, Natin, the chairman, was indeed home for his field work. The chairman worked tirelessly for the common good, surrounded by a whole array of beer cans. Doors were never locked here, but Natin's house turned out to be locked. Rodrigo had to ring the bell and wait. While waiting, he looked around. His father's old house had long been demolished, and the crooked wooden fence was gone too. Instead, a solid 2-story mansion made of red brick with real tiles had been built. After a few minutes, an unfamiliar young woman opened the door, attractive, well-groomed, with a graceful figure. Who are you looking for? Natin. I'm his school friend. I came back to my hometown for a visit, so I stopped by for old time's sake, Rodrigo reported briskly, smiling with genuine warmth. Ah, I see, the woman nodded understandingly. Well, then, come in. Are you not from this village yourself? Rodrigo asked her as they walked along a neatly paved stone path towards the house. No, I'm from the neighboring one, she replied, opening the entrance door. Go straight ahead, to the left. To the left was a spacious dining living room with a view of the garden. At least, that's the grand name the large, insulated terrace adjoining this part of the mansion claimed for itself. Wow! Looks like you've settled quite nicely here, Mr. Chairman. Rodrigo smirked, entering the room where Natin sat, sprawled in a low, soft armchair, enjoying another can of beer. Who are you? How did you get in? Natin stared at the unexpected visitor in bewilderment. Don't even recognize old classmates anymore? Rodrigo grinned with feigned joy. You're all like that, bosses. Rodrigo. Natin finally recognized his former classmate. Well, what brought you here? He straightened up and grew alert, not expecting anything particularly good from this visit. First of all, they had parted ways more than 10 years ago on less than friendly terms. Tragic circumstances had contributed to that. Secondly, bits and pieces of information about what and how the younger Santos was doing had reached even here. Or rather, they used to reach here in the first few years after Rodrigo's departure from his hometown. But then they ceased altogether. It's me, Rodrigo smiled broadly. He had no intention of bringing up past grievances now. So many years had passed. The contentment and tranquility that had enveloped Rodrigo since his return home still hadn't left him. But he needed to understand what was happening here, to grasp the situation, so to speak. That was precisely why he had come to see Natin. After all, this man was now in charge, so it made sense to start with him. How have you been? I see that everything is going well for you, Rodrigo, without waiting for an invitation, sat down on a neighboring armchair near a coffee table. Yeah, I can't complain, the host smirked. How about a drink together? He initially reached out to offer Rodrigo an unopened beer can but changed his mind, stood up, and fetched a larger bottle of stronger spirits. Here, this will be better. They drank, talked about this and that, reminiscing about the old days. Natin looked confident, still as talkative and self-assured as before, but he had changed externally to a much greater extent. He had gained weight and lost his athletic build. He wasn't yet 30, but his face had become puffy and somehow unhealthy looking. He's become a heavy drinker, Rodrigo realized, noting to himself that Natin was following in his father's footsteps. The father had once binged so much that the whole village heard him chasing his sweetheart around the yard. How long will you be staying with us? Natin asked, like everyone else Rodrigo had already met, as they bid farewell. I haven't decided yet. I'll stay for a week or two, and then we'll see, Rodrigo replied. Well, drop by my office whenever you have time, and I'll show you my properties, Natin kindly winked, pleased that Rodrigo didn't show any hostility. People like us should stick together. He thinks I'm a gangster. Rodrigo realized as he walked back home. And he considers himself part of that circle. Something doesn't add up. In general, this visit left a bitter aftertaste. Behind Natin's playful demeanor and clear reluctance to discuss serious matters, there was something else hidden. What could it be? Rodrigo had yet to find out, but for now, he needed to focus on his own affairs. During their conversation, Rodrigo casually asked his former comrade about the prices of nearby houses for sale, mentioning his thought of buying something for a country house. Natin laughed and replied, "This isn't a metropolis, and there's nothing good for sale around here." Nevertheless, he needed to buy something since he had decided to stay in his hometown forever. Upon arriving home, Rodrigo decided to contact a real estate agent and tried to reach her via Viber. The mobile connection was terrible, nothing loaded properly, and the connection would disconnect every 15 seconds. "Do you have Wi-Fi here?" he asked his mother. "The mobile network is barely working." "Wi-Fi? That's something we haven't caught up with yet," she laughed good-naturedly. "All we have is mobile internet, and even that is unreliable. Anyone who needs something urgent goes up the hill." "Are you serious?" Rodrigo was surprised. "They still haven't installed proper internet? That's terrible. What about the neighboring villages?" "Only in the district center," his mother shrugged. "We manage without it, but the younger generation suffers, of course." "Of course, nowadays you can't do without it, especially for studying," Rodrigo shook his head. "Well, they're not thinking about studying first and foremost." His mother laughed again. "So, if you need something important, go up the hill, son." "Yeah, damn it." Rodrigo pondered and fell into thought. Things aren't as smooth in my hometown. And then it struck him like a lightning bolt. Yes, that's what he should do. He would start a company and become a local internet provider. He would bring high-speed internet from the fiber optics to the villages and rural areas. The money from selling his apartment should be enough for such an enterprise. If needed, he could take a loan from the bank. Small businesses were getting loans easily nowadays. He had experienced it before. The guy's mood instantly lifted by 12 hours on the clock face. It didn't matter that he would have to live with his mother for some time. He had found a purpose, and what a purpose it was. He had been interested in such things since childhood. Although he hadn't received any formal education beyond high school, he had a great understanding of modern communications. He just had to wait for the apartment to be sold. In the meantime, he would focus on registering his business entity, which was not his first time doing so. The registration office, like everything else related to civilization and official structures, was located in the district center. During dinner, Rodrigo mentioned that he had some errands there and suggested that his family join him to buy what they needed in the city. He proposed using the gift card if they had any plans for it. "Oh, Rodrigo, that would be very convenient. It's great to have a car," his mother exclaimed happily. "Alejandro and I have been meaning to go to the market for a while, and it wouldn't hurt to visit the polyclinic as well. He needs to make an appointment with a cardiologist." "We'll take care of everything," Rodrigo promised enthusiastically, waving his hand. "Take your time, and we'll go in a couple of days." "Thank you." Alejandro shook his hand. "I appreciate your thoughtful approach." "Don't mention it. We're not strangers anymore." Rodrigo smiled. "If you need anything, just let me know. We'll figure it out." At Rodrigo's city apartment the next morning, the caregiver, nanny, and doctor met after his departure. Where did they go? And why? The doctor asked, sounding dissatisfied. Did he decide to go on vacation with that poorly treated child? I don't know, the nanny shrugged. No one briefed me. He only wrote to me that they won't be here for a while. He asked me to look after the apartment and sent money in advance for a month. It seemed like it was for a vacation, and we'll talk later. Well, I called him too, but his phone is unavailable. The doctor complained. We need to properly document the girl. Arrange her documents. What kind of approach is this? He's so irresponsible. What kind of irresponsibility are you talking about? The nanny suddenly objected. Our Rodrigo is a good person, the most responsible person you can find. He has never mistreated us, always polite and considerate. And he truly cares for the girl, despite her being a complete stranger. Although, now that I think about it, she may not be a stranger. Maybe he's not telling us everything, and she really looks like him, I swear. She calls him daddy, and he genuinely loves her. But if he doesn't want to arrange the documents, well, that's his business. Everyone has their reasons. Oh, stop it. The doctor grimaced, responding rather rudely. We still need to find out what he plans to do with the child. There are all sorts of monsters out there. Well, you've gone too far. The honest woman got angry. Rodrigo is not a monster or maniac. I understand what you're insinuating. Yes, that's exactly what you're hinting at. Honestly, it's disgraceful. How can you even say such things? Shame on you. And she started opening the doors from the apartment to the staircase, grumbling disapprovingly and making it clear to her interlocutor that the conversation was over. The doctor had to retreat. As a responsible person and a good professional, he was tormented by the thought that, by suspecting his wealthy patient, he might become an accomplice to some heinous crime. Let's not overly criticize the honest doctor for such thoughts. He had indeed seen a lot in his lifetime. He had all sorts of patients with different motives. Sometimes their minds would come up with such things that would make your hair stand on end. For instance, at the moment, he was observing a young woman from a fairly wealthy family who suffered from a peculiar personality disorder bordering on schizophrenia. She believed, for a long time now, that her child had been taken away from her, even though she had never had a child and couldn't have had one. The woman had been ill for many years and was always under the careful supervision of her relatives, either at home or in a mental clinic. The doctor had recently been invited to see her based on a recommendation, and in this short time, he had already heard enough from her. Anyway, God help her, this poor mentally ill girl, the doctor interrupted his own thoughts. Now I need to think about something else, whether or not to report the child's abduction to the police. On one hand, there are sufficient grounds to believe that harm could be inflicted upon the girl, her so-called guardian left with her in an unknown direction. The doctor has not substantiated his rights over the child and does not inspire trust either. His place of work is unknown, and the source of his fairly comfortable lifestyle is also unclear. He's probably some kind of criminal, just look at his car. Can you earn that kind of money honestly? On the other hand, if Rodrigo wanted to harm the girl, why would he take care of her so attentively? It's unlikely to be a manifestation of maniacal tendencies. The doctor had seen them together. The man treated her like his own daughter. The doctor, with his experienced professional eye, didn't notice anything suspicious in his behavior. In the end, our doctor came to this conclusion: he would go to the police and inquire if anyone had been looking for a child resembling Christina based on the description. If the answer is yes, then he will reveal everything, no matter what the consequences may be. And if the answer is no, then he won't say anything and will explain that he needed to verify the story of one of his patients, especially considering that she did indeed tell something similar. Having settled his thoughts, the doctor calmed down, went into a snack bar, had coffee with a pastry, felt better, and went about his business. The trip to the district center took place several days later. Alejandro's mother had to collect orders from neighbors who had heard about the event, finish some urgent household chores, find the necessary documents for the appointment, and update the directions with the local doctor who visited the village only twice a week. Alejandro, enthusiastically choosing a new gas boiler, frequently sought advice from Rodrigo. The two of them settled on a couple of models they liked, and Rodrigo promised to provide all the necessary assistance to install it on site. "That will be wonderful," exclaimed a satisfied Alejandro, rubbing his hands together. "Our old water heater is barely holding on. Any moment now, it might give out. Then we'll have to rely solely on the stove, and we won't have any hot water at all." Yes, it's a necessary appliance," agreed Rodrigo. "We'll definitely get it, install it, and test how it works. The manufacturer offers a 2-year warranty. We just need to fill out the warranty card." We left early in the morning and didn't return until around 9 o'clock. We were exhausted, but we accomplished so many useful things. We completed everything that was planned and even more. We brought souvenirs for all our relatives and neighbors, and we bought everything on Rodrigo's sister's list. On our way back, we stopped by their village, unloaded the boxes of purchases from the trunk, and picked up Christina, who had been staying with her aunt while her father, grandmother, and newly minted grandfather were busy with their errands. They all played together so well. Teresa smiled. "Just like you and I did in our childhood, Rodrigo. They turned the whole house upside down. And your cat caught a huge rat. It turns out he's a skilled rat catcher. Now the entire village wants to invite him over. Skilled rat catchers are a rarity. We must get kittens from him." "Well, I don't think it will come to that," Rodrigo smirked, placing his well-fed, round-faced cat, Fluffy, into the carrier. "Come on, buddy. You're going to become a star here soon, you know." "Daddy, I had so much fun," Christina happily announced, hugging Rodrigo around the neck. "Now I have 2 little brothers." "That's right. Oh, you're my joy." Rodrigo affectionately kissed the girl on her velvety cheek. "Well, let's go home." "Not home," the girl protested. "To Grandma. I want to stay with Grandma." "Well, sweetie, with Grandma, we are home." Rodrigo stroked her head. "This is also our home, understood?" "Yes," the girl nodded. "A different home, but better." Out of the mouth of babes speaks the truth, Alejandro chimed in, and everyone present burst into laughter. The registration of the new company was completed in a week, and they had to go and collect the corresponding documents. But until the apartment was sold and they had money to purchase everything they needed to occupy themselves with something. Rodrigo enthusiastically started working around the house, fixing and repairing things. His hands automatically remembered various little tasks that his father had taught him when he was a boy. "I see, Agata, your son has really grown up. He's a spitting image of his father," Agata's neighbor Flora said approvingly as she entered for a chat. Both of them sat down for coffee and looked out of the kitchen window, which overlooked the neighboring yard. In the yard, Rodrigo had been dealing with a large pile of old tree stumps for the past 2 hours, chopping them into neat logs. "Thank you, Flora," Agata replied happily. "I can't believe in my own happiness. He was gone for so many years, and now, here he is. It's so unexpected and delightful." "No wonder you're delighted," Flora agreed. "Our children are our canvas. Maybe he'll stay here with us permanently now?" "I don't know, he hasn't said anything yet," Agata shrugged, feeling a chill. "And we haven't asked Alejandro either." "You should ask him," advised the neighbor. "After all, you're his mother, you should know what your son's intentions are. I can see he's a serious young man. It seems that the wrong path didn't sit well with him." But there was no need to ask. On the same day, during dinner, Rodrigo told them everything himself. In the excitement that the apartment was finally being sold at a good price, he did some calculations and realized that he had enough money, no need to take a loan. Of course, he would still need to assess the situation and hire workers. But for the time being, he had the resources. "We'll have to live with you for a while, Christina and I. Will you not kick us out?" he asked his mother and stepfather with a hint of worry. "What are you talking about, Rodrigo?" the woman exclaimed, throwing her hands up. "This is your home, your ancestral home passed down from your father. Of course, you and Christina should live here. Where else? What's all this talk, Rodrigo? Seriously?" Alejandro supported his wife. "I have to apologize if I was a bit sour in the beginning, keeping an eye on you. You know the rumors that were going around. But now I see you're a fine young man, worthy of respect. And now you've decided to engage in a proper business that will benefit people. In short, I approve. But I do need to find an office," Rodrigo said thoughtfully, after the relatives stopped to express their joy. "I think I'll organize everything here. I'll go to Nathan and ask him for a temporary space in the administration building, as there's nowhere else to look. We don't have another administrative building in the village. Don't get involved with that scoundrel, for God's sake." Alejandro suddenly became serious. "Nothing good will come out of it." "Why do you call him a scoundrel?" Rodrigo frowned. "How can we call him if he robbed the entire village? How is it? Tell me." Alejandro didn't waste any time and shared the story. According to him, confirmed immediately by Rodrigo's mother, here's what happened. About 8 years ago, when Nathan became the new chairman, the cooperative divided large agricultural lands into equal shares, 40 to 60 hectares per worker. It turned out that some law required them to allocate land to everyone. Well, the villagers were delighted that suddenly everyone became a real landowner overnight. They were given documents specifying the allotted portions based on years of service. Alejandro, for example, received a 60-hectare plot in a good location near the forest. Rodrigo's mother ended up with even more, 120 hectares for herself and her deceased husband. The villagers started making grand plans. Some intended to sell their hectares, especially since there were interested buyers offering good money. Others, mostly the younger ones or those with helpful children, planned to establish their own farming businesses. But all those plans went down the drain when the new chairman distributed the plots and immediately invented some fees. He prepared the necessary documents, claiming they were decisions made by the General Assembly. But what assembly? They had never been invited to any assembly before. Yet, surprise, surprise, everything turned out to be legal. Official papers started arriving in the villagers' mailboxes, complete with seals, demanding payments of certain amounts by specific dates. Where was Grandmother Alvarez supposed to get that kind of money for those fees? Or Georgia, who was raising 7 children on her own after losing her husband? Dissatisfaction and complaints spread. But the only response they received was that it was a decision of the General Assembly. Either pay or, if you can't, sell your share. And there was no one to turn to. They had orchestrated everything cleverly, leaving no room for protest. As it turned out, they could only sell their shares back to the cooperative, the very same company. Damn it all! What else could they do? Slowly but surely, they started selling for peanuts, honestly, based on the cadastral value. One sold, another sold, and the third followed suit. Soon, a significant portion of the village had sold their hectares back. And the actual owner became the chairman of the board. He created some fake documents, established another company, and bought up all those shares for a cheap price. As for the remaining villagers who hadn't sold yet, he forced them to sell through the courts, the scoundrel. It seems that he's now the biggest owner, and he's the only one who can buy the rest. That's how it is, Alejandro concluded his story, sighing irritably. He completely screwed us over, that Chairman Natin. Who is he after all, if not the ultimate scoundrel? Well, that's something, Rodrigo said thoughtfully, furrowing his brow. It's an ugly story. We should discuss all this with a good lawyer. Do you still have the documents for the sales? And the old ones from when the plots were allocated, at least copies? Some things are still left, the mother shrugged indifferently. They're in a box over there if you want to take a look. Yes, I'll definitely look at them later, Rodrigo decided. Once I've sorted out my own business a bit. His affairs took up a lot of time and effort. Cristina, for the most part, was taken care of by Alejandro and their mother. Rodrigo would only come home late in the evening, completely exhausted. But despite that, he felt a deep satisfaction from the results. Everything was going as planned. The temporary office space was eventually arranged in Alejandro's house, which had been standing empty and forlorn for several years. When they decided to move in together, they naturally chose Agata's place. What sane woman would trade her own cozy home, painstakingly built over the years, for the chaotic nest of a confirmed bachelor? And that bachelor was Alejandro, a retired schoolteacher. However, Agata, breaking with tradition, started calling him by the warm and affectionate name Alex, showing that this man was now tamed, domesticated, and accepted as her own. She did it unconsciously, of course, but it was clear to everyone. "You're a lucky woman, Agata," said a nosy neighbor, with a hint of sarcasm. "You snagged yourself a second husband without ever leaving the village. And both of them are quite good." "Don't worry, Maria," Agata calmly replied, seemingly oblivious to the biting irony. "A good person will come your way too. And if you need any help, just say the word. Alejandro will come and take care of it. And aren't you afraid I might steal him away?" The neighbor jeered. "He's quite the catch." "No, I'm not afraid," Agata replied, looking her in the eye. "Well, see you soon." And she walked down the street as planned, heading to the only tiny shop in the village. That's how Alejandro and Agata lived all these years, harmoniously, without paying attention to the mockery and caustic remarks of some villagers. And now things were even better. Their son had returned. He was their support and protection, their hope and joy. And he had brought his own blood granddaughter with him. Oh, how Agata loved her with all her heart. Barely the first time she held the small, delicate, almost weightless baby in her arms. Yes, she was truly happy, and there was no point in resisting or getting angry at fate. "Rodrigo, don't hesitate to make yourself at home in my little hut. Knock down the walls if you want." Alejandro encouraged the young man when they decided to have the company office there. Rodrigo was grateful for the opportunity, and first thing, he tore down the old, unattractive fence. Some workers made a few improvements on the outside, patching the roof, painting it, and giving it a decent appearance. Inside, they had to do some renovation work, bringing it closer to a modern style. Instead of a fence, they planted bushes along the perimeter, creating a sort of living hedge. They set up a communal relaxation area inside. They installed benches, flower beds, and even a playground, an unprecedented thing in the village. Rodrigo wanted people who came here to see beauty, to know they were welcome, and to provide themselves and their children with cultural leisure. Additionally, he came up with the idea of creating an internet club in the office, modeled after urban anti-cafes, for those who didn't have a computer at home. In the village and surrounding areas, not everyone could afford such a thing. They would come here, have a workstation with internet access for a small fee, and there you go, everyone could work, learn, and enjoy oneself. Mainly, it was the young people who started coming. They watched movies, downloaded games, as one would expect. But it wasn't just that, they also sought materials for their studies and downloaded various literature from electronic libraries. They even organized virtual tours to museums and historical sites as a whole class. It was now possible. And after the Internet Club was opened, Rodrigo also launched computer literacy courses and another workshop on robotics and modeling. He invited specialists from the city who would come twice a week. And people flocked to it. Everyone wants to provide their children with useful knowledge. And here it was, right nearby, without the need to travel to the far district center. The computer club also introduced a new service, assistance with online document processing, so that people wouldn't have to wait in queues, traveling to the city. They didn't waste at least half a day anymore and could do many useful things remotely, claim tax deductions, make a doctor's appointment, apply for subsidies, put their child on the waiting list for a kindergarten, or even get married. All these things, long available to city dwellers, were new and exciting for villagers. Soon, people crowded into the office of the new company, making use of the relaxation area, the playground, and the vending machine that Rodrigo thoughtfully installed. Gradually, this new place became a kind of attraction. Meetings were scheduled here, families came to stroll with their children, and in the evenings, young people hung out on the benches, coming from all around, with music playing through the speakers. Alejandro's house was always off to the side, so it didn't bother anyone much. During the warm seasons, they started organizing outdoor parties. In short, the buzz began, even more than Rodrigo had expected. He even started considering opening a small cafe. It seemed like everything was pointing in that direction. The company's main focus attracted its first major clients in the region, a poultry farm, a livestock complex, that very school in the neighboring village where Rodrigo once studied, and several private farms. The team of cable installers and technicians worked tirelessly. Natin, the chairman, held on until the end and continued to use the services of the mobile internet provider as before. But seeing how rapidly the new company was developing and, more importantly, the quality of their connection, he finally gave in. He came to sign contracts for himself personally and for the entire farm. Well, it seems you've settled in quite nicely here too," Natin exclaimed cheerfully, paraphrasing Rodrigo's first words when he visited him 6 months ago. "Indeed, I can't complain," Rodrigo replied in the same tone, and they both laughed. Of course, Rodrigo well remembered the family's revelations about Natin's manipulations, but he didn't show it. It wasn't time yet to address that issue. "So, this is how the advanced city folks do business, huh?" Natin mockingly said in a lively tone as he circled Rodrigo's office. Not bad. Tell me, my friend, why didn't you stay in the city if things were going so well for you?" "I was drawn back to my homeland, away from the hustle and bustle," Rodrigo calmly answered. "Besides, it's good for my daughter's health. The doctors recommended fresh air for her." "Ah, fresh air?" Natin repeated thoughtfully. "Well, yes, we certainly have plenty of that here. You've hit the nail on the head." He continued speaking in a similar tone, rambling on about various trivial matters as was his longtime habit. But suddenly, Rodrigo realized that Natin envied him. This discovery unpleasantly surprised him. What could he possibly be lacking? He had a happy family, a house, and his job. There was nothing to complain about. He sat at home most of the time, with only a secretary and a cleaning lady in the office. Reflecting on this, Rodrigo also realized something else. If things were going well on the farm, Natin wouldn't wander aimlessly around the village or spend his time idly at home. He simply wouldn't have had the time for it. Rodrigo contemplated this and ordered an extract from the registry. It could be easily done on the tax authority's website, as long as he had the company's registration number. He found this number in his mother's documents regarding the sale of land. What he read in the prepared electronic extract hardly surprised him anymore. The closed joint stock company was on the verge of bankruptcy, external management had already been introduced, and only a miracle could save the farm from ruin. It was worth delving into and finding out the cause of the farm's dire state and who initiated and caused this process. Eleonora had been sick for as long as she could remember. It was never hidden from her. On the contrary, they even impressed upon her how sick she was and how different she was from all the other normal people. In her early 20s, she hardly knew the world around her because she had spent most of her life within the walls of her apartment, albeit large and luxurious, but more resembling a prison than a normal home. Or in many clinics, she even lost the track of counting them. It was in one of those clinics that her mother died a long time ago, after attempting suicide in that same large and luxurious apartment. Eleonora's mother was an incredible beauty from a good, intelligent, but impoverished and almost destitute family. She married an unloved man much older than her at the insistence of her parents. This marriage greatly improved the family's financial situation but destroyed the poor girl. The sight of her husband made her tremble, and any contact with him was repulsive. As a result, one not particularly beautiful, rainy, and gloomy evening, she took sleeping pills, leaving this transient world behind, leaving behind only a few photographs and a little daughter. Eleonora was barely 8 years old at the time. She remembered vividly the acute sense of what was happening, which only children experience in a state of stress. Her father, a tall, hefty man with thick horn-rimmed glasses, returned home from somewhere they had taken her mother and shook her in anger, swinging her in the air like a rag doll. You little wretch, it's because of you. Why are you staring at me? You're just as abnormal as your mother." Nannies and grandmothers, who had gathered from all corners of the vast apartment, shouted out loud and tried to take the child away from the enraged father. Eleonora herself seemed to be in a stupor. She fully understood what was happening but couldn't utter a single word. She just looked at her father in horror, with her already enormous cornflower blue eyes wide open, but the sounds within her seemed to have run out, gone silent. The doctor who came the next day said that Eleonora had hysteria. "I told you," cried the inconsolable widower, for whom losing his wife, especially in such a disgraceful manner, also became a real shock. "I told you she's just as hysterical as her mother, may she burn in hell forever." And he burst into tears, dropping his head into his hands and throwing things at the walls. The beautiful wife had been his mad passion, and now this orphaned man, deprived of his beloved toy, was inconsolable in his own way. For some unknown reason, he placed all the blame for what had happened on his 8-year-old daughter, and she accepted it as absolute truth. It ended with the girl being taken to a psychiatric clinic because she could no longer interact normally with others. Since then, Eleonora had lived like that. She was constantly on medication, somewhere between reality and a wild, nightmarish dream. At the age of 17, she was raped by one of the doctors, a young resident, completely enchanted by the unearthly, elvish beauty of his patient, Eleonora. She grew up resembling her mother, only thinner, more delicate, with skin that hadn't seen the sun for many years, porcelain-like, resembling a Chinese figurine, almost translucent. Ashen hair and huge bright blue eyes that occupied half of her face completed this fantastical image. Neither bruises under her eyes nor the rough hospital clothing could spoil this beauty. Eleonora seemed to be above everything earthly, unaffected by the transience and meagerness of this world. It is unknown whether she understood what happened to her when the passion-blinded physician dragged her into a small room filled with medical supplies and did whatever he pleased with her fragile, compliant body. 9 months later, she gave birth to a tiny, weak girl who was immediately rejected by Eleonora's guardians. She, considering herself incapacitated, couldn't make any decisions, but somehow she remembered the brief time she saw her child and even breastfed her. Several times she was brought to feed the baby until she was transferred to an orphanage. Where's my daughter? Where is she? Why was she taken away from me? The unfortunate girl complained to anyone she encountered, doctors, orderlies, attendants. Sometimes she was even taken home, to her uncle and aunt. Eleonora's father had long since passed away, surviving his wife by only a couple of years as he shot himself with his service revolver. Now her uncle, her father's brother, was her guardian. He and his wife currently lived in a large luxurious apartment and took care of Eleonora, the sole heir of her wealthy father. According to her father's will, Eleonora was supposed to inherit all his property under 2 conditions: reaching the age of 21 and being completely healthy. Her health status had to be confirmed by 2 independent doctors. However, if for some reason she couldn't inherit the estate, all movable and immovable property, wherever it may be and whatever it consisted of, would go to the mental clinic where Eleonora's mother once died. What a savagery! The girl's uncle exclaimed more than once, complaining to his wife. What cynicism! How could they defile the memory of our parents like this? If he didn't care about his only brother, and the only normal relative, he should have thought, at least, about our honor. About our family's honor. This is a scandal to leave everything to some lunatic. But, dear, it's possible that the girl won't live to 21. She's so ill. Then you, as the sole heir of your brother, would receive all his property, his wife reasoned. Don't you understand? He fumed. That's the point. I won't receive anything. This wretched will is written in such a way that either she or the mental institution can inherit everything. And I'm the lawful son of our parents, just like him. Think about it, I can only inherit from her. That is, if she inherits and then dies. Then, yes, please, the property goes to me as her closest relative. But if she dies before the required age or cannot accept the inheritance due to illness, I won't get a damn thing. The mental institution gets it. Oh, God! Why is all this happening to me? The sufferer cried out, raising his hands theatrically to the heavens. Why is fate so unfair to me? Unjust fate played a cruel joke on him once again. After so many years of effort that he and his wife had put into Eleonora's recovery, after such dreadful expenses on doctors, medication, and the maintenance of this worthless girl, she became pregnant and gave birth. What does this mean? The guardian shouted furiously in the office of the clinic's chief doctor. We entrusted you with the most precious thing we have, our girl, our baby, and one of your staff impregnated her. It is the real monstrous crime. The doctor tried to justify himself as best he could, but nothing helped. Unfortunately, the incredible fact of the patient's pregnancy was revealed quite late, at a stage where an abortion was no longer possible. In the end, the matter was hushed up, with substantial compensation paid to the affected parties. Eleonora gave birth to a child who, to the dismay of the guardians, survived despite being weak and small at birth. Do you understand what this means? The uncle exclaimed, clasping Eleonora's hands and addressing his wife. Now, this, he pointed with his chubby finger at the small bundle of human life, this creature is her heir, not me. Oh my God, what is happening? His wife shook her head. We need to get rid of her somehow. Exactly, get rid of her immediately. Her husband agreed. The necessary paperwork was signed, and Eleonora's infant ended up in the care of the foster home. Several months later, the girl was lucky to be taken into a foster family where 8 or 9 other foster children were already being raised. 3.5 years later, the girl was diagnosed with a severe hereditary disease that required expensive treatment. The foster parents couldn't come up with anything better than simply discarding the unwanted child. They initially thought of returning her to the orphanage, but they were told that all institutions were overcrowded and they would have to wait a bit. The sorrowful parents didn't want to wait, it was inconvenient. The little girl constantly dirted the bedding and cried loudly. She also spoke poorly, and it was impossible to understand why she was crying, or they simply didn't have time to figure it out. They took in children for the financial benefits, not out of love. It wasn't for the meager amount that the government paid to all parents raising children under 3 years old, but for something else, the compensation given to the guardians of such foster families. That's how the little girl ended up on the streets. Surprisingly, another member of the household, a lilac British cat named Max, left the house with her. The girl loved him dearly and stubbornly called him by the simple, ordinary name Fluffy. "How many times do I have to tell you?" scolded the foster mother. "His name is Max." "Max? You are a stupid idiot. It's not Fluffy. Now, get to your room. I'll give you a proper thrashing." "Hush." The lilac Max, bristling at the owner, leaped forward, arching his back and raising his fluffy tail like a little tiger. He hissed and growled, ears pressed back. "You wretch!" The owner exclaimed in dismay and struck the cat with a mop. The cat clung to her leg with claws and teeth and was subsequently thrown into the stairwell. "What a monster! And he's pedigreed, too. Imagine the amount of money spent on him, it's terrifying. Let him scavenge through the dumpsters now." A couple of days later, the brave little girl, who dared to bring her Fluffy back, was also sent to the dumpster. They were both thrown out together, without much concern for how the child would survive. Social workers who visited the foster family about a month later couldn't find one of the children. "Oh, she was sent to her grandmother in the village," the mother informed them. "The doctor prescribed fresh air and cow's milk. She'll walk around there and come back, our little sweetheart." This little girl was picked up from a dusty park after a month and a half of wandering by Rodrigo, who named her Christina. And along with her, there was a cat. Around the same time, Eleonora finally turned 21. Needless to say, her guardians did everything possible and impossible to ensure that a panel of 2 independent doctors, who were generously paid, declared her completely healthy. Sitting in a fancy new dress with a neat hairstyle, she sat in a chair and smiled as instructed, promising a delicious cookie as a reward. The invited notary was busy preparing the necessary documents. "Well, then, please sign here." "Yes, good. Now you are officially the heir to your father's entire estate and receive a certificate of inheritance. Congratulations." Continuing to smile with a doll-like forced smile, Eleonora cautiously took the pretty yellow document from the hands of the unfamiliar person and looked questioningly at her uncle. "Like, did I do everything right?" "Yes, Eleonora, congratulations," her uncle said for some reason instead of answering, and he took the beautiful piece of paper and put it somewhere. "And what are we going to do now?" the wife asked Eleonora's guardian discontentedly as soon as the door closed behind the notary. "It's unlikely that they will take her back to the asylum, given that she is perfectly healthy to the extreme." "Well, with money, anything is possible," the uncle chuckled contentedly. "But I have come up with something better." "Oh? What is it?" The wife became interested. "Let's go to the kitchen, and I'll tell you," he said, leading his wife away, leaving quiet and harmless Eleonora in the company of the television and delicious cookies. Finally, there was a slight break in the affairs, if not an interruption, and Rodrigo was able to attend to the long-standing land issue. He took the papers, went to the city, and found the office of a lawyer recommended to him long ago. He showed him the documents. "It's complete nonsense," the lawyer summed up, scanning through the contracts. "How could so many people fall for this? There are obvious violations at every step. I just can't believe it. Of course, they buy up estates for pennies everywhere, but these pennies are quite significant for ordinary people, and this is simply robbery." "I think the same way," Rodrigo agreed. "Would you take up exposing this fraudster?" "Of course," the lawyer nodded. "This involves fraud, forgery, and the misuse of a public position for personal gain. In short, a bouquet of 10 years or more." "Excellent. So, it's a deal," Rodrigo decided and left all the necessary materials with his attorney. Months of investigation dragged on, and villagers were summoned for interrogations, both individually and in groups. The farm was sealed, and its operations were suspended. Natin, the chairman, was taken away in handcuffs to the detention center, where he had been safely residing for about 6 months. Rodrigo kept shuttling between the city and his own affairs, as well as the land matters. He met with the bankruptcy trustee, as the parallel bankruptcy process had not been canceled. Creditors were clamoring at the doors of the administrative building and jamming the phones. "What are the debts and assets for today?" Rodrigo asked the manager, and they had a long conversation, sorting through papers. When the trial of the former chairman was nearing its end, Rodrigo announced to his family that he had a surprise for everyone. "It concerns all the villagers," he said at the family table. "Soon it will be our father's birthday, may he rest in peace. Did I tell you that it's also Christina's birthday?" Rodrigo paused, surprised at his own spontaneous remark. And after hearing the joyful exclamation from his family, he added, "On Sunday, I will gather everyone at the club. There will be the opening of a cafe and the big announcement, the surprise." "Rodrigo, I'm getting nervous," his mother said plaintively. "What kind of surprise is it?" "Don't worry, Mom," the young man affectionately stroked her hand. "It's a good surprise, everything will be fine." On the designated day, the club barely accommodated everyone who came. First, there was the solemn opening of the cafe. In the brand new building on the adjacent piece of land that was previously vacant, there was now enough space for everyone. "You can come here to relax or rent the space for any occasion," Rodrigo announced. "Son, do you also allocate funds for memorial services?" Grandma Natalia, the long-lived village resident, muttered. "I want a proper memorial service." "And for memorial services as well," Rodrigo agreed, smiling. "But, Granny, it's better if you keep on living. Look how good everything is around here." Amidst collective laughter, Granny Natalia received a solemn assurance that her memorial service would definitely take place here. "And now, let's move on to the second part of our celebration," Rodrigo said loudly, addressing everyone present. "Today is the memorial day for my father, whom you all knew well. He was a wonderful person, with a pure soul. I may be his son, but I have a long way to go to be like him. However, I want to be worthy of my father's memory. Therefore, I declare to you, dear neighbors, that from this day forward, we all, me, you, each and every one of you, even you, Natalia, we all become co-owners of a new agricultural cooperative. It will replace the old farm. Each person will receive their land plot back, which was unjustly taken away from us. Now the land is communal again, but this time, we are not employees bending over for a chairman or the government, we are equal shareholders." What a move! Is that true? They returned the land, or am I hearing things? Different voices exclaimed. It's the absolute truth. Here are all the documents. Come forward one by one and receive them, Rodrigo replied. Oh my God, what a joy! But who did all this to us? Grandma Natalia scrutinized the villagers with an intense gaze. Whom should we be grateful to? It's obvious, isn't it? Alejandro, who was already in the know, answered her. It's all thanks to Rodrigo. He took care of the matter, bought back the land from the creditors, and divided it among everyone, not leaving anyone out. The people expressed joy, relief, gratitude, and appreciation that followed these events cannot even be described. A satisfied and slightly embarrassed Rodrigo stood surrounded by his fellow villagers, accepting congratulations. He answered questions, smiled, laughed, and rejoiced along with everyone. Then there was a celebratory dinner paid for by the new establishment. And dancing. People dispersed to their homes well into the morning, yawning and shielding their tired eyes from the bright light of the emerging dawn. A few days later, Rodrigo was returning by car from his sister's place in a neighboring village. Passing by the former farm pond, he noticed a small group of people not far away by the river, who, by the looks of it, seemed unfamiliar to him. An elderly man and woman stood next to a young, fragile girl on old broken planks of a bridge. Rodrigo was about to stop and warn the newcomers that it was dangerous to be there. The logs were thoroughly decayed, and the river had just cleared up after the ice breakup. The water was chilling and fast flowing. If you fell in, it would sweep you away, and that would be the end of you. But before he could turn off the road, he witnessed a horrifying scene. The man pushed the girl off the planks with his own hand. Pressing the accelerator to the maximum, Rodrigo raced toward the shore, barely paying attention to the road. His Jeep, roaring with strain, scattered greasy mud in all directions from under its wheels. Pulling up close to the scene and catching a glimpse of the distorted faces of the strange couple, Rodrigo jumped out of the car and without hesitation plunged into the water. A minute passed, then another. The icy currents burned like fire. His head was buzzing and pounding, but the girl was still nowhere to be seen. Squinting his eyes shut and taking a deep breath, Rodrigo dived, opened his eyes underwater, and saw a dark spot wriggling very close by. He grabbed it. It was either an arm or a leg. It was impossible to discern in the murky water. He pulled with all his strength. It didn't give in. He realized that the drowned girl had caught onto something underwater. Summoning his last reserves of energy, he made a desperate lunge. The fabric ripped and gave way, and the heavy wet body pulled at his arms, but he managed to resurface. Fortunately, the water wasn't too deep near the shore. If only it had carried her a little further away, or if she hadn't gotten caught by something. Shivering, he emerged from the water with his terribly heavy burden, placed the wet, lifeless body on the back seat, and began performing artificial respiration. After a minute, the drowning girl took a deep breath. Water rushed out of her lungs, and she started breathing on her own. Rodrigo started the engine and swiftly drove away from the riverbank towards the nearest medical station. "Hurry up! Help!" he exclaimed, drenched and wearing soggy shoes and soaked clothes, as he burst inside. "Oh my God!" Everyone rushed around, bustling and fetching alcohol, towels, hot water, and more. Rodrigo, exhausted, collapsed onto a couch, his head tilted back. He desperately wanted to sleep. "Come on, get up," he heard through a daze. They undressed him, rubbed him dry, dressed him in dry clothes, gave him a drink of alcohol, and then something hot. They laid him on a hospital bed, and immediately he succumbed to a healing sleep without any dreams. Where is she? Is she alive?" Rodrigo asked as soon as he regained consciousness. She's alive. She's still lying down," the nurse retorted gruffly. "The doctor will come soon to see you." They were discharged at the same time. Rodrigo was diagnosed with bronchitis, but oddly enough, he had a broken rib. "You fractured it upon hitting the water. It happens sometimes," the doctor explained. The girl, however, suffered much more: bilateral pneumonia, shock, and complete memory loss. She spoke very little and smiled calmly, with an otherworldly smile. The perpetrator who had thrown her into the water was immediately apprehended. He didn't even attempt to escape. He was shocked by the fact that in such a desolate place, as it seemed to him, a skilled rescuer appeared. The police identified the identities of all three individuals and quickly unraveled the chain of events that led them to that location. They planned to get rid of her here. They rented a house nearby, pretending it was for her to spend the spring and summer in the fresh air, the investigator recounted. They thought that in this deserted place, they could easily kill her and then claim she fell into the water herself. Or down the hill into the ravine, as it would have appeared. But it turned out completely different, Rodrigo said grimly. "What kind of scoundrels are they? To kill an innocent person for money? For a lot of money?" The investigator clarified. "A lot. Believe me, more often than you think, people are killed for much less." Rodrigo visited the patient after she had been discharged. Since she was clearly unable to live independently, and her relatives turned out to be criminals, the guardianship authorities appointed a temporary state guardian for her, a social worker who visited as often as the service allowed. In a simple rural cottage without any special comforts, the rescued girl appeared so defenseless and helpless that Rodrigo's heart ached. Just like when he found his Christina. "Good day," he greeted upon entering. The situation was, of course, mediocre. The former guardians didn't make an effort to find comfortable housing. "Good day," the girl echoed softly, giving a slight smile, more with her eyes than her lips. Shyly, timidly. And she looked at Rodrigo with such trust that something inside him suddenly turned upside down. This look, outside the hospital walls, finally helped him understand who this completely unfamiliar young woman he had saved reminded him of. Yes, undoubtedly, she had the same eyes and the same open gaze as his Christina. But how could that be? Rodrigo was already aware of her story. The attending physician had shared some details, and the rest came from the social workers. "How are you feeling?" he asked, more out of politeness than a genuine desire to hear the answer. The answer wouldn't have told him anything. Her eyes had already said it all: how lonely she felt, how melancholic, how scared and trembling alone at night in a strange house and an unfamiliar place she was. As if understanding that an answer wasn't necessary, she didn't say anything, only glanced away and sighed. She looked out the window at the fields and the awakening groves, peeking through dark gaps under the melting snow cover. "Get ready, I'll take you home," Rodrigo suddenly said, not knowing how it came out. He hadn't planned on taking her and was not prepared for such a turn of events. "Okay," she nodded, as if that was all she had been waiting for. She walked slowly and hesitantly through the house, packing a few things into a bag. "Shall we go?" Rodrigo asked trustingly, and she reached out her hand to him, just like a child. First, he brought her to her own home, intending to go to the doctor and then to the guardianship service the next day to discuss everything before taking her to the city. "Daddy, Daddy." Christina flew towards them and stopped, surprised by the unexpected guest. "Who is this, Daddy?" she asked her father, approaching closer and clutching his hand, half hiding behind him, just in case. "This is Eleonora. She will stay with us tonight, and tomorrow I will take her home," he explained. As he said these words, he looked at the girl. She stood there pale, somewhat dazed, staring at Christina's face as if she had suddenly seen a ghost. "Girl," she finally spoke with an overly calm and distant tone. "Pretty girl. I had a daughter too, but they took her away." "You had a daughter?" Rodrigo exclaimed in surprise. No one had told him about this fact in Eleonora's biography. He thought she had spent her entire short life in the clinic or under house arrest. The attending physician of the district hospital, after reviewing her medical history and then speaking with the patient herself, frowned for a long time, examining Eleonora's pupils, feeling her pulse, and tapping her knees and wrists with a reflex hammer. And then he called for a consultation with a psychiatrist. "The patient has certainly spent most of her life with a diagnosis," the psychiatrist said after thoroughly examining Eleonora as well. "But I don't see any clinical signs of a genuine mental disorder. It seems more like some old psychological trauma. Untreated shock combined with prolonged use of specific medications and a negative environment." Rodrigo, in his conversations with Eleonora back at the hospital, also didn't find her to be mentally disturbed. Yes, she was completely unfamiliar with real life, and her behavior was strange, with a stiff and inhibited way of communicating. But when she smiled, she radiated joy, her face lit up with such warmth, and her eyes sparkled with genuine, lively emotions and curiosity. There was no doubt, she wasn't crazy. She was simply an unfortunate victim of circumstances. At Rodrigo's home, she was surrounded by attention and care. His mother treated her to homemade delicacies. Alejandro brought her a warm jacket, appalled by her thinness and bruises. "Really," he said, shaking his head disapprovingly. "Look at what they've done to this girl." Christina, having settled in and assured that this unfamiliar aunt posed no threat to her, brought her toys to show Eleonora. Even the cat came and rubbed against her legs, then suddenly jumped onto her lap, started purring, something he had never done with strangers before. "Kitty." Eleonora smiled in admiration. "You're such a good kitty. So fluffy." She petted and squeezed his plush fur, burying her hands in it, and the cat patiently endured it all, purring, purring, purring. He even went to sleep with her, although he always slept exclusively with Christina. He settled down beside her on the neatly made bed, and when Rodrigo's mother tried to chase him away, he growled at her viciously. "Let him stay," Eleonora requested. "Please don't drive him away." "She's a strange one, son," Rodrigo's mother said doubtfully when the guest had fallen asleep. "She had a very difficult life, Mom," her son replied and recounted Eleonora's entire story. "Oh, Lord! How can such monsters exist on this earth?" His mother crossed herself when he finished his story. But what will she do now, all alone? Without a family, without support? Someone will hurt her again, no doubt. There are plenty of vultures out there with their eyes on her money. "I think so too," Rodrigo sighed. "We should find a way to help her." "But how? What if she stays with us for a while?" Agata suddenly suggested. "I could teach her everything, how to live, how to communicate with people, and gradually manage household tasks, of course." "Are you serious?" Rodrigo asked, looking attentively at his mother. "Of course," she nodded. "I feel sorry for the girl. We can't abandon people in such distress. I believe, son, that fate brought her to us. And you saved her from the water for a reason. It's God's will." "Okay, Mom," he kissed his mother's forehead. "You're the best." The next day, Eleonora was told that she could stay with them for as long as she wanted, that no one would force her to stay, and they wouldn't charge her for lodging. "You, my dear, have become dear to me, like my own kin," Agata told her. Eleonora looked at the woman intently and suddenly ran up to her, embracing her and bursting into tears. Agata also shed tears. "What's wrong? Why are you crying, Grandma?" Christina, still sleepy, came into the kitchen, holding her favorite doll in one hand. "Is something bad happening to us?" "No, Christina," Agata replied, wiping her tears. "The happiness came to us. Sometimes people cry from joy too, you know?" "No," the little girl shook her head. "People laugh from joy. Let's laugh instead." And she burst into cheerful laughter, showing the adults how to rejoice. That same morning, Rodrigo left for the big city where he had lived all these years, the city where Eleonora had struggled to survive. He carried an official request from the guardianship authorities to meet with the chief doctor of the clinic where the young woman had been observed and treated for many years. Rodrigo intended to talk to him and obtain a medical history report. The strange resemblance between Eleonora and Christina, as well as Eleonora's words about her child being taken away, had been troubling him. Of course, the chief psychiatrist wasn't inclined to explain anything to an outsider, but he still provided the medical report. There was nothing to be done, such requests had to be answered. As Rodrigo read the dry official lines, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully and frowned. The document indeed stated that nearly 5 years ago, Eleonora had given birth to a baby girl. It also mentioned the institution where she had been sent afterward. Now feeling almost certain about his previously unclear premonitions, he returned home, where he was greeted by 3 women, an elderly one, a young one, and a very young one. They were baking an apple pie and laughing cheerfully. "We have something to show you," Rodrigo's mother said after they finished lunch and the pie. "Look." She lifted Christina, raising her hair at the nape of her neck and spreading it with her fingers. "See?" A large, dark brown birthmark in the shape of a heart adorned the linen hair. Eleonora showed that it was there, his mother informed him. "She told me that her baby had a birthmark like that." "Do you understand anything, Rodrigo?" "Yes, now I understand almost everything," he replied. In turn, he shared the information he had obtained with his mother. "Rodrigo," Eleonora entered the room and called his name for the first time. "I'm glad you're back. You know, I remembered my daughter, there she is." The girl pointed at Christina. "Now they won't take her away from me, right?" Eleonora looked at him with her cornflower blue eyes, like those of a fairy elf, with such hope that he suddenly felt, finally realizing what he should have understood a long time ago. He would never let her go or give her to anyone else, just like Christina. Of course, it's true. You don't have to worry now, Eleonora, he gently touched her hand. Now we are all together, and everything will be fine.